The sands of time are constantly shifting, burying the past and revealing the future in unexpected ways. We dig through the dunes to find the stories that were meant to be remembered forever. Hit subscribe now and don't let these moments slip away.
I didn't make a sound. I stood in the hallway outside the kitchen, my hand still resting on the wall where I'd been about to turn the corner, and I listened. The refrigerator hummed. The faucet dripped the way it always did. And my daughter-in-law's voice carried through the house the way voices do when people believe they're alone. I'm not doing it, Thomas. I'm telling you right now. She can go back to Charlotte. She can go to one of those places. I don't care. But I'm not spending the next 5 years being someone's nurse. I didn't move. She's your mother, my son said. He said it quietly, the way he says everything. Thomas has never raised his voice in his life. His father was the same way. I used to think it was a virtue. And she's a grown woman, my daughter-in-law said. With options. We have a life, Thomas. We have Caden and Lily. I did not sign up for this. I heard the refrigerator open. The sound of a bottle being set on the counter. It's just a surgery, Thomas said. 6 weeks, maybe 8. And then what? Her hip heals, and then what? She's 67. Things don't stop happening at 67. This is how it starts. You let them move in for the surgery, and then it's one thing after another, and suddenly you've got a 75-year-old woman in your guest room, and your whole life is organized around her schedule. I had been in their guest room for 11 days. I walked back down the hallway the same way I'd come, slowly. My hip hadn't been replaced yet. That was still 3 weeks away, so I moved carefully, one hand on the wall. I went back to the guest room and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I looked out the window at the backyard, at the play set Thomas had built for the grandchildren last spring, at the bird feeder that needed filling. I did not cry. I had $2.3 million in a brokerage account, $890,000 in a separate IRA, and a paid-off house in Charlotte that I'd been renting out for 4 years since I moved closer to family. My husband Walter had been a civil engineer for 31 years. He was careful with money the way he was careful with everything, quietly without making a show of it. When he died 6 years ago, I discovered that his carefulness had been a gift he was still giving me. I had never told Thomas the full picture. I told him his father left us comfortable. That was true. I just didn't explain what comfortable meant. I picked up my phone and I opened my banking app. I looked at the numbers for a long time. Then I opened Zillow. My name is Winifred, and I am 67 years old, and I have been a practical woman my entire life. I taught high school English in Charlotte for 26 years. I graded papers on Christmas Eve. I coached the debate team through 4 state championships. I raised Thomas mostly alone after Walter's work took him to project sites for months at a time. And I did it without complaint because complaining was not something I had time for. You do what needs doing. That's what my mother taught me, and her mother taught her. And I've never found a reason to think otherwise. Thomas is my only child. He's 41 now, an IT project manager. Steady job, good benefits. He married Fiona 8 years ago. She's 38, works in pharmaceutical sales, drives a white SUV she leases new every 2 years. She has good taste in furniture and very firm opinions about how a kitchen should be organized. When I first visited after the wedding, she rearranged the cabinet where I'd put the coffee cups and didn't mention it. Just moved them. And I noticed, but I said nothing because it wasn't my kitchen. Fiona and I have never fought. I want to be clear about that. We have never had a single argument. What we have had is 11 years of a very careful, very polite distance, the kind that feels like civility but is actually just 2 people agreeing not to address anything real. I always thought that was fine. I told myself it was fine. My hip had bothering me for 2 years. Bone on bone, the orthopedic surgeon said, and it was time. Thomas called me the week I got the surgery scheduled and said, "Mom, you should come stay with us before and after. You shouldn't be alone for something like this. Caden and Lily would love to see you." And I thought, yes, this is my family. This is what family does. I drove up from Charlotte in October. Thomas helped me carry my bags in. Fiona had made up the guest room with fresh sheets and a pitcher of water on the nightstand, and I thought, see? It's fine. It's going to be fine. The first week was genuinely fine. I had dinner with them every evening. I helped Lily with her 2nd grade reading. Caden, who is 9 and in a phase of intense interest in World War II, told me everything he knew about the Battle of Midway while I sat with him at the kitchen island and drank my decaf. Fiona was busy. as she always is. She travels 2 or 3 days a week for work. And on the days she was home, she was on her phone or her laptop. But that was normal, I understood that. The second week, I started noticing things. Fiona had mentioned, when I arrived, that their regular babysitter had taken another job and they were between people. She mentioned it casually. The way you mentioned the weather. I didn't think much of it. But on a Tuesday evening, Thomas texted me at 4:30 to say he'd be home by 7, and Fiona wasn't back yet, and could I get the kids dinner? I said of course. I made pasta. The kids were happy. It was fine. Wednesday, the same thing. Thursday, I made grilled cheese and tomato soup. Friday, Fiona came home at 8:15 and thanked me and said the kids had told her I made the best soup. And I smiled because they are my grandchildren and I love them. The third week, it wasn't occasional anymore. It was the assumption. Nobody asked. That was the thing I kept turning over. Nobody said, Mom, would you be willing? Nobody said, Winifred, we really appreciate this. The schedule simply restructured itself around the fact of my presence, and my presence became a resource, and the resource was not discussed because resources don't require discussion. I started paying attention to other things. The way Fiona talked to Thomas about money, the kitchen renovation they wanted, the vacation they were planning in March, the new sectional sofa she'd found. Thomas would nod and say, let me look at the numbers. And she would say, you always say that, and the conversation would move on. They had a good life. They had a nice house in a good suburb of Nashville. 2 healthy children, 2 incomes. They also had, I calculated from things Thomas mentioned, somewhere around $40,000 in credit card debt and a home equity line they'd drawn down substantially for the last renovation. I'd helped them twice before. Once when they bought the house, I gave them $60,000 toward the down payment. Once 3 years ago when Thomas's card died suddenly and they were stretched. I gave them $15,000. I gave it as gifts. I didn't expect repayment. I didn't keep score. I thought about that standing in their kitchen the second week, watching Fiona move through the space with the confidence of someone who has never once worried about whether she is a burden. And then I heard what I heard. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time that evening. I want to tell you what I was feeling because it was not what you might expect. I was not devastated. I was not falling apart. There was something happening in my chest, yes, a tightness, a kind of grief. But underneath it, there was also something very clear and very steady. And that thing was a decision forming. I had done nothing wrong. I had been invited here. I had been useful, more useful than they'd acknowledged. I had a surgery coming up that I had not asked them to accommodate, that Thomas had asked me to accommodate here. And I had heard my daughter-in-law say in her own kitchen that I was not her problem. All right, I thought. All right. I picked up my phone. I texted my friend Constance and Charlotte, who used to teach biology 2 classrooms down from me, and who was the most competent person I have ever known. I said, I need a favor. Can you look at a few listings and tell me what you think? She called me back in 4 minutes. That's Constance. I explained not everything, just enough. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. She said, send me what you're looking at. I spent 2 hours that night on Zillow. I had parameters. Single floor preferred because of the hip. Near good medical facilities. A neighborhood with some life to it. Coffee shops, a library, somewhere to walk. Not too far from Nashville that I'd lose contact with the grandchildren entirely, but not Nashville itself. I found 3 properties. I sent them to Constance. She called me back the next morning and said, the second one is the right one. Trust me. The second one was a single-story house in Franklin, Tennessee, 24 minutes from Thomas's front door. Hardwood floors, a sunroom, a small garden that the listing described as established. Listed at $595,000. I called my financial advisor the same afternoon. I had done business with him for years. He knew me. I told him what I was thinking, and he walked me through it without a single comment about whether it was a good idea, because that wasn't what I'd asked him. I told him I'd need the funds cleared within 10 days if possible. He said he'd make it happen. I didn't change anything about my behavior in the house. That is important. I want you to understand this part. I did not become cold. I did not withdraw from the grandchildren. I made dinner when it was expected of me. I helped Lily with reading. I listened to Caden explain the significance of the Doolittle raid. I was present. I was warm. Thomas asked me twice that week if I was feeling okay, and I said yes, just a little tired. The hip, you know. He nodded and patted my shoulder. Fiona gave no indication she knew I had heard. I gave no indication either. We were very good at our careful distance, she and I. The offer on the house was accepted on a Thursday. My surgery was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I kept the appointment. I am a practical woman. I needed the hip replaced, and the surgeon was excellent, and putting it off would only have made things harder later. Thomas drove me to the hospital. He sat with me before they took me back. He held my hand, and I looked at his face, this face I had known since before it was a face, and I felt the grief again, the real grief, the one that had nothing to do with money or houses. I thought about Walter and how much he had loved this boy. I thought about Walter and how much he had loved this boy. I thought about what we had hoped for. "You're going to be great, Mom," Thomas said. "We're all going to be right here." I squeezed his hand. I said, "I know. The surgery went well. I came home to their house in a wheelchair I'd need for 2 weeks, then a walker, then a cane. Fiona had arranged the guest room differently to make it easier to navigate. She had put a grip bar on the wall near the bed. I noticed the care that had gone into it, and I thought, she is not a bad person. That is not what this is about. Some people are simply telling you very clearly what they are willing to do and what they are not. She had told me. I was listening. The physical therapist came 3 times a week. I did everything she told me to do. I am a good student. I have always been a good student. I have always been a good student. By the end of week 2, I was on the walker. By week 4, I was on the cane. Week 5, on a Wednesday morning when Thomas was at work and Fiona was traveling and the kids were at school, the movers came. I had arranged it carefully. I hadn't accumulated much in 11 days, plus the weeks of recovery. I'd brought only what I'd packed from Charlotte. I had 1 large suitcase, 3 boxes of books, my quilting things, my good cast iron pan, and a bag of items for the grandchildren that I'd been collecting. The movers were in and out in 40 minutes. I had tipped them well because they were quick and professional, and there was no reason not to. I took one last look around the guest room. The grip bar was still on the wall. I left it there. It might be useful someday. Not for me. I left a note on the kitchen island. I am a person who believes in notes. Thomas, I have found my own place in Franklin, and I'm doing well. Come visit whenever you'd like, you and the kids. I'll have dinner waiting. I love you. Mom. I didn't mention Fiona. Not out of cruelty. There simply wasn't anything I needed to say to her at that moment. I walked out on my cane, and the sky was pale November blue, and I got into the car I'd arranged to have driven down from Charlotte, and I drove 24 minutes to my house with the sunroom and the established garden. And I sat in the sunroom for a very long time while the movers from the local company I'd also scheduled brought in the furniture I'd ordered the week before. It was a Wednesday. It was 11:15 in the morning. Outside the window, the garden had a Japanese maple that had gone orange and red for fall. I thought, yes, this will do. Thomas called at 6:15. I had been expecting the call. I had made myself a simple dinner, eggs and toast. I wasn't ready to explore the full kitchen yet, and I was sitting in the sunroom with the lamp on, watching the last of the light leave the garden. Mom. His voice was tight. What happened? Where are you? I told him I was at my new house. I gave him the address. I told him I was fine. The recovery was going well. I had everything I needed. You just left. I did, without saying anything. I left a note. Silence. I could hear him breathing. She's very upset. She feels terrible. She doesn't understand. That's all right, I said. Mom, what happened? Did something happen while you were here? Did she say something to you? And here is where I made my first decision about what kind of conversation this was going to be. I said, Thomas, I heard what Fiona said in the kitchen about 5 weeks ago. I want you to know I'm not angry. I heard her, I understood her, and I made my decision. I found a house I love. I bought it. I'm home. The silence this time was longer. She said, Mom, she was venting. She was stressed about a deadline at work. She meant it enough to say it, I said. And that's all right. She's allowed to have her feelings. She doesn't want to be a caregiver. That's honest. I respect honest. Mom, please, can we come over? Can we just come over and talk? Of course, I said. Saturday, come for lunch. Bring the children. I'll make that macaroni Caden likes. Thomas and the children came on Saturday. Fiona did not come. Thomas said she was embarrassed. I said that was understandable. We didn't discuss it further. I watched Caden and Lily run through the house, exploring every room, and when they found the sunroom, they stood at the window looking at the garden with the delighted seriousness of children encountering something new, and Lily said, "Grandma, do you have birds here?" And I said, "We'll get a feeder." And she said, "Can I help pick it out?" And I said, "Obviously." Thomas sat across from me at the kitchen table after the kids had gone outside. "Tell me what you need," he said. "Tell me how we make this right." I had thought about this part. I'd spent a lot of the previous 2 weeks thinking about it, during the hours when the house was quiet and I was doing my physical therapy exercises, with the TV on in the background. I had thought about what I wanted and what I didn't want, and what would actually mean something versus what would just be performance. I said, "I don't need anything. The house is bought, the furniture is in, my hip is healing on schedule. I am fine." "I mean with us," he said. I looked at him for a moment. He looked like his father. More every year. "I'm not walking away from you," I said. "You are my son. That is not on the table. But I need you to understand that I heard your wife say that I was not her problem. And I need you to understand that you said okay. You said okay, Thomas." He looked down at his coffee cup. "I know," he said. "I'm not punishing you. I bought this house because I wanted to, and I can afford to, and it is the right thing for me. But I want you to think about what you said okay to. That's what I'd like from you. Just think about it." He nodded. He didn't look up for a moment. Then he said quietly, "The house." "It's a nice house, Mom. It must have cost. It's handled," I said. "Dad left more than I. Your father was a very careful man," I said. "Dad left more than I. Your father was a very careful man," I said. I've tried to honor that. He didn't ask me for a number. I wouldn't have given it to him. Not then. Fiona came on the third visit. It was a Sunday in December, cold and bright, and she stood in my doorway looking smaller than I had ever seen her look. And she said, "Winifred, I am so sorry." She said it quickly, like she'd rehearsed it in the car, and her face was tight with the effort of it. I stepped back from the door and said, "Come in. It's cold. I made tea." We sat at the kitchen table while Thomas took the children out back to look at the new bird feeder. Through the window, I could see Lily pointing at something in the branches of the maple. Fiona wrapped her hands around her mug. She said, "I have been sick about this. I want you to know that. I've barely slept." I said, "Fiona, I believe you. And I want to say something, and I'd like you to hear it without feeling like it's an attack." She looked at me carefully. She nodded. I said, "What you said was honest. You told my son what you were willing to do and what you weren't. That's not nothing. But the problem is that you were talking about me, a living person, sitting in your guest room, as though I were a condition to be managed. Not a person, a condition. And your husband, my son, agreed. And what I'd like is for the two of you to think about what kind of people you want to be, not for me. For those children out there." She didn't say anything right away. She looked out the window at Lily and Caden and Thomas standing in the cold. "I think," she said slowly, "that I have been afraid, for a long time, of losing our life, of everything changing." She paused. "That's not an excuse." "I know it isn't," I said. "But it's something." We sat there for a while. The tea got less hot. Eventually she said, "I'd like to try." "If you're willing." I told her I was willing. I told her I was willing. I told her I wasn't keeping score. I told her that what I wanted, what I had always wanted, was to be included. Not as a burden to be prepared for, but as a person who was part of this family. That was all. She said she understood. I believe she was sincere. I also know that people can be sincere in December and find sincerity harder in July, when schedules are full and patience is thin. I am 67 years old, and I know this about people. I gave her the same thing I had given my students, back in the years when a student would come to me after making a mistake. The real chance, the one with no strings attached. The one that doesn't keep looking over its shoulder at what came before. What happens with that chance is always up to them. It is February now. Thomas comes on Sundays usually with the kids. Sometimes without Fiona if she's working or if she needs the day. I don't ask about it. He sits in my kitchen and we talk. and it is better than it has been since. I'm trying to remember the last time it was this easy between us. And I think it might have been before Fiona, back when he was still at the university and he'd call me on Sunday evenings from his apartment. We talk like that now. Like there's nothing we have to pretend about. My hip is healed. I walked 2 miles yesterday morning through the neighborhood. Past the coffee shop I've started going to on Tuesdays. Past the library where I've signed up to help with a literacy program that starts in March. I move like myself again. I had forgotten what that was like. Moving without the constant calculation of how much each step was going to cost me. The garden is waiting for spring. The woman who sold me the house left detailed notes about what she planted and when, tucked into an envelope in the kitchen drawer. Coreopsis and black-eyed Susans and a climbing rose on the back fence that blooms pink in June. Lily has already asked if she can help plant something. I told her we'd go to the nursery in April and she could pick out whatever she wanted, within reason. And she said, "What does within reason mean?" And I said, "It means nothing that grows 8 feet tall." And she considered this very seriously. Caden comes over on alternate Thursdays because his school has a late start, and Thomas drops him off while he's in a meeting. We have a standing arrangement now. I make eggs and toast. He tells me things. Last week it was the Korean War. Next week I believe it will be something about volcanoes. Fiona and I have talked twice, really talked, since the day in December. Once on the phone, once when she came over alone while Thomas had the kids. We're not close. I don't think we will be close, not the way I might have hoped once, but we are something real now. Something that has been pressure tested and knows its own shape. That is more than we had before. I have not told Thomas the full numbers. I may at some point in a different context because I believe in honesty about things that matter. But right now, it is not what matters. Right now what matters is the Japanese maple going bare for winter, and the bird feeder that needs filling again, and the literacy program starting in March, and the climbing rose that will be pink in June. I did not come through this winter to be careful with my life. Walter was careful so that I would have choices. I intend to use them. This morning, I woke up early, and I made coffee, and I took it to the sunroom, and I sat there in the gray February light. And I thought about my mother, who worked 30 years in a laundry and saved what she could and told me, always, that a woman who does not know her own worth will let other people set the price. I thought about Walter, careful and quiet and always a step ahead. I thought about the 26 years I stood in front of other people's children and tried to teach them that their voice was worth something, that their story mattered, that the way they told it was a form of power. I held my coffee with both hands. The maple tree held its shape against the pale winter sky. I had nothing to prove to anyone. That, finally, was the whole point. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in a dramatic way, just the quiet, practical way you think about things when you're sitting in a sunroom in February with good coffee and enough stillness to actually hear yourself. What happened to me didn't come out of nowhere. It built, slowly, the way most important things do. Fiona didn't wake up one morning and decide to be unkind. And I didn't wake up one morning and decide to leave. There is a long chain of small moments. A cabinet rearranged without comment. A dinner expected without being asked for. A conversation overheard that was never meant for me. And each one of those moments was a choice that someone made, including me. Because I made choices too. I gave money without asking for acknowledgement. I helped without requiring it to be named as help. I kept the peace in ways that allowed other people to believe there was no peace that needed keeping. I was so careful not to be a burden that I made it easy for people to forget I had needs at all. That was on me. I'm not saying it to punish myself. I'm saying it because it's true, and truth is more useful than comfort. What I've come to understand is that the way people treat you is partly a reflection of what you've taught them to expect from you. Thomas and Fiona didn't know what I was worth. Not financially, and not in any other sense either, because I'd spent years being smaller than I was. Staying in the background, accommodating, not wanting to impose. And when you spend long enough making yourself easy to overlook, eventually people stop looking. The morning I walked out on my cane and got in my car and drove to my own house, something shifted in me that I don't think is ever going to shift back. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was just clarity. The kind that costs something to arrive at, that only comes after you've stayed somewhere too long or given something away that you shouldn't have. I had let my own life become something that fit around other people's convenience, and I was done with that. What Thomas is learning, slowly the way he learns everything, which is carefully and without drama, is that respect is not automatic. It is not owed by blood or guaranteed by proximity. It is built through attention and honesty, and the willingness to ask yourself hard questions about who you are when someone needs something from you. He is doing that work now. I watch him do it on Sunday mornings in my kitchen, the way he sits with his coffee and chooses his words. And I am proud of him in a way I couldn't have been 6 months ago. Fiona is trying. That is real. Trying is not nothing. Trying is actually where everything either starts or doesn't. And the children. Caden and Millie don't know any of this, and they don't need to. What they will know over time is that their grandmother has a house with a garden and a sunroom, that she shows up, that she is someone you can count on. That is the thing I can give them without reservation and without conditions. That is the part of the story I am most grateful for. I am 67 years old. I have a healed hip and a climbing rose that will bloom in June, and a literacy program starting in March. I have a son who is learning to be braver, and a friendship with Constance that has survived 30 years and multiple crises and will survive plenty more. I have, finally, a life that is organized around my own choices. Walter always said the point of being careful was so that someday you'd have the freedom not to be. I think I finally understand what he meant.